All right, so good afternoon. This is Vivian Lei, and I'm a third year student at the University of Chicago, majoring in English Language and Literature. This interview is brought to you through Professor NDIA's class, Black Shakespeare. Today we have with us Devon Glover, a renowned hip hop artist, poet, educator, and Shakespeare performer from Brooklyn, New York. He has been performing Shakespeare's sonnets and soliloquies under the stage name The Sonnet Man at various schools, theaters, and festivals. Devon has also been featured on NBC, MSNBC, BBC, and other media outlets. We're thrilled to have you today with us, Devon. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Uh, Thank you for having me. Yes, my background, first and foremost, is in education, and as a my passion for writing poetry and hip hop, I like to teach through music, and I write for a company called Vocabulary that teaches many subjects through hip hop. And through my work, from using music and using hip hop, I connected with my manager who had this project of the Sonnet Man, of translating Shakespeare's sonnets to music. First, it was for entertainment value, but based on the visions that both of that he had and that also that I had, um, it evolved into a we like to call it edutainment because we like to keep the educated the entertainment factor in it. And since Shakespeare is used in schools 400 years after his passing, in an educated way, this was just a way of keeping his name relevant, keeping education more innovative, and yeah, just another way of presenting Shakespeare.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. So, when was the first sonnet or soliloquy you tried to adapt into hip hop through your project of the Sonnet Man? And could you please tell us a little bit more about the creative process behind it?
All right. Well, the first project I ever did based on Shakespeare, because again, it was like a butterfly effect. I was writing for Vocabulary, a school, a high school from Brooklyn, New York, asked me to help out their class with. She was teaching Shakespeare at the time. I did not know, but when she reached out to me and I agreed to help out, she presented the play. She said she was working on Othello, so that was the first time. And the reason why I used hip hop was I was just trying to find a way of connecting to the students. And when I began reading Shakespeare's words out loud, I noticed there was a meter to it, and noticed there was a pattern to it. So we wanted to first just gain their interest. So we, just performed it, because Shakespeare is meant to be seen, meant to be heard. Performed it with the rhythm and the wordplay and the rhyme. It kept the ears, the interest, and them seeing it acted with us, presenting inflection and emotion within behind the words, it gave them a better sense of the work. So that was the first time I ever worked on Shakespeare. The first time, and then from that work, I got connected with my manager, who had this idea of the Sonnet Man, and he wanted to put Shakespeare's work to music, Shakespeare's sonnets to music. And he tried many different genres. And the beauty about Shakespeare's sonnets are the format that he writes. They're like nice compact verses about love, different forms of love, um, with the wonderful rhyme scheme, literary devices, and it can be used in different music genres. And R.G. Shaw, he tried to present it in many different genres, from spoken word to R&B to jazz. And he gave me a try from just hearing from a mutual friend. And when he asked me to rhyme Shakespeare as a writer, as an MC, I said, yeah, I definitely can rhyme this. This is amazing, but can I write my own version? Because I don't want to just be rhyming somebody else's words. And that's how it became, the Sonnet Man. So the process, for Shakespeare, first off, we use the sonnets. The sonnets work well in the educational aspect because they're only 14 lines, they're compact. And if you can, the confidence you get with reading a sonnet to give you more confidence when reading a book, reading a play. First Shakespeare play I ever received was King Lear. First time I ever seen Shakespeare was King Lear. And that was like the beginning I ever seen Shakespeare. So from high school to my adult years life, Shakespeare was always complicated to me. That's because that's the way it was presented. And plus, I was just given this play and told to read, rather than examples and, putting it on our feet and seeing it on a stage. So with this, I wanted the students to hear the inflection and hear how I connected with it. And the process, again, since they're sonnets and they're compact, I like to do line for line. As the sonnets, the whole idea of the modernization is trying to connect to the audience. And my for when I began, well, to this day, when I began, I would like, I write to the point, like, as if I was to recite one of Shakespeare's sonnets to like one of my friends or my family, and they say, "What did you say? What does that mean?" So now I have to break down this sonnet. And then if I'm breaking down the sonnet, I want to break it down in a musical way, in a hip hop way. So that all goes in with the translation. With music, whether I'm creating a lesson plan or making a song for theater or making a song for radio, my whole idea is to make the listener bob their head and want to repeat the song. So the entertainment aspect is always going to be there. So I take pride into making sure that is modernized. Since it's an educational standpoint, I don't want to say simplified, but more understandable, since we, as much as wonderful as Shakespeare's words sound, we don't, our language, we don't speak like how he speaks now. Our language has evolved over 400 years. So it's like, it's bridging the gap basically from the late 1500s to 2020, from Stratford upon Avon, where he wrote it for his audience, where he created his slang and created his words for his listeners, to Brooklyn, New York, where I can add my idioms and my terms that would make his sonnet more understandable to my audience. So again, with the sonnets, they're line for line. Um, I try to pay attention to like the theme aspect, because with a lot of Shakespeare's sonnets, he likes to use like metaphors and similes to enhance the theme, and I would try to present that in my sonnet. But I would try to show that Shakespeare was doing whatever literary device he was showing. And 14 lines is similar, is I what they say in hip hop, a regular verse is 16 bar verse, so it's close to 16 lines. So it's good to do line for line, but sometimes I may add or subtract some lines, based on the sonnet. But it's again, it's a feel. I also do workshops, and I try to encourage my students or the writers that whenever they're doing adaptations, to create it their own. This is your voice. So each sonnet, I have sonnets where he's, so he may sound the reader may be insulted, like Shakespeare might be insulted, or Shakespeare might be down and out, but I might make it comical, or there's some wonderful metaphoric sonnets where he's talking about somebody's looks, and that's some sort of like a romantic, theme for me. Or he has a lot of life sonnets. Yeah, that as much I do translations with them, I have a lot of translations with them, but when it comes to recording them, it's a lot of it's based on feel. Like, yeah, I connect them all to my, what's going on in my daily upbringing. And with lines is just making sure that the word's understandable. Like there's some words that Shakespeare may use that were relevant only in his time. So I'll make sure I'll have the definition in there, or make sure that word is broken down. So there'll be a parallel between different centuries. So there's a lot that comes with it, but it takes, I do like 3 or 4 rough drafts, writing drafts based on it, and would you know, give it to a Shakespearean, or I would give it to a teacher, a Shakespearean, and somebody that's not um, experienced in Shakespeare, just to get their thoughts on it, see if they understand the parallels, see if that now that they heard the second verse, now if they get a better understanding of Shakespeare. So I got to test it out also before I publish it and bring it to students to make because as much as it's my own, this is also a lot of the songs that I write could be used as learning, used for a lesson. So I want to make sure that the research is there also. So takes a lot.
Thank you so much. I think this is really helpful. It definitely allows me to learn more about the creative process behind your sonnet creations. So I think you've mentioned that you're an educator who tries to help kids learn more about Shakespeare through rap and hip hop music. So how did your students react to the hip hop Shakespeare? And did they like it? Do they prefer it to the more traditional Shakespeare plays or Shakespeare sonnets?
I sort of, as somebody in the educational field, I sort of feel I feel sort of like a superhero when I come into a class, because I usually get brought into a class, when I began, when the teacher finds out about me and I get, contacted, the teacher's contacting me saying, I gotta find a way to get these students interested and into this, or I gotta make it more understandable. So I get to come in there for about an hour or maybe a week, the longest, and instill a jolt of energy to the students. So, if a teacher is um, musical and rhythmic and can see the connection between Shakespeare's words and lyrics, and transcribe it to a lesson plan, it makes it understandable. My I think my love for hip hop, the fact that if I can read anything and start, whether it's in prose or in verse, I can start singing it or rapping it to make it more entertaining, make it more entertaining. Um, when I come in, I already have sonnets and pieces of Shakespeare that I work with that I can put to music that teachers that don't necessarily rap or write can connect. So I sort of feel, I feel like a superhero when I brought in. I try to give them a surprise factor, like, because when I first did Othello, it was like, the teacher brought me in. The students who never met me, they were not even, before I could even talk, they didn't even care there was a guest in the classroom. And when I told them, I was like, all right, open your books, turn to page one. And then when I started reciting it with the rhythm, you could see their heads looking up like, oh, okay, this is cool. So I sort of a similar thing. Like, I like to start slow. And then I know once I give them, an introduction, or a demonstration, like if we talk about Sonnet 100 and we start breaking it down, and I give them just like how I gave you a generic process of how I break down sonnets. So if I break down the sonnet line for line, and I'm like, all right, here's my breakdown. Here's my song example of sonnet 100. Then I perform it. They become more interested. And if they're right, as young students, if they're writers and enthused, they want to. They'll either think they can do a better job than Shakespeare, a better job than myself, which is what I like, or they would like to collaborate with their students, with fellow students, to break down Shakespeare's work and write their own adaptation. So the music gets them interested. Um, excuse me. Yeah, the music gets them interested, and just to keep their attention locked in on what I'm doing, and open them up to just let them know that they can do this also, and just write like Shakespeare, or write like myself, or write their own adaptation. And I hope that answers your question.
Oh yes, definitely. So
Mhm.
me myself, I'm personally a student in English language and literature. So Shakespeare is kind of like a figure that we have to learn at school, but I've never thought about learning Shakespeare through hip hop or music. And I think when I first encountered you on the internet, I was like, oh wow, I think his project is really cool. I wish we can have something like that at school. So thank you. That is really helpful.
Appreciate it.
All right, so next question. When we talk about performing Shakespeare on stage, we usually think of performing, for example, a Shakespearean play or playing the specific character from this play. And as you've mentioned, you've talked about Othello and also you have your own Hamlet adaptation. So I'm
Mhm.
wondering, but I think when I was watching your videos and when I first encountered you on the internet, I think you're usually performing by yourself on stage. And I think
Mhm.
what's most interesting is you're directly channeling the role of Shakespeare as the bard and as the modern hip hop artist. So could you tell us a bit more about your decision to perform the role of the bard? And how does performing Shakespeare through music and hip hop different from performing him through the roles of Othello or Hamlet in a theater production?
Um, well, doing it like as a sonnet man. So let's just say I don't want to have like 8 monikers, but if I'm doing it like my solo performances as a sonnet man. So every piece that I do, like my version of Hamlet, my version of Sonnet 130, my version of 29, it's all coming from my eyes, my vision. Whoever the audience is, like for me, when I write, my audience is whoever wants to hear my story because I connect my story to Shakespeare's pieces. So there's no limitations to what I can say. Um, I'm not going to say anything that's going to like. As an artist, I don't want to push anybody away with my lyrics. So I'm not vulgar and I don't have any hatreds in my bones, but I'm not going to swallow my tongue about my blackness or how I feel connected to any of the sonnets. I'm a one man show. But when I'm doing like a play for Shakespeare, like for production, like a theater, I always incorporate, well, first I have to listen to the director, the mind of the director. Then I have to compromise. If the director's vision is not with my vision, I have to find a middle ground, right? And there's always like there's pluses and minuses with it. You know, I've had some. I'm sorry, put my headphones in.
No worries. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So I've had some like there's been times where I've had roles where how can I say this? Yeah, I've had roles, where I've been like the only person of color, the only black male, and I want to represent that proudly. And there's been times where I've been given directions that I haven't been a fan of, whether, directions like, something to is like to show like stereotype of African American or directions where it's like I wouldn't do that. You know, this doesn't connect to my country or so like for instance, and whenever I get a role, I I channel actors that I can relate to. Um and like I know I don't want to say I'm pigeonholed as a black man to get a role, but I do sometimes get pigeonholed as an artist, which I get pigeonholed as a rapper because luckily and it's good. There's a good and bad to it um because Shakespeare used a lot of literary devices and rhymes. There's a lot of roles that I can and he writes in verse. There's a lot of roles I can get attached to, and but with the hip hop role, somebody would you know at, I look at my music and acting in two different arts. They're both fine arts, but two different arts. So if you put me in a role and you have a theme, and yeah, you have a theme, you put me in a role in this play, I'm not gonna act. I'm not gonna have my hip hop culture if it doesn't blend in with the Elizabethan culture that you have on. So you can't tell me to act this way and I stand out and you try to do the stereotypes of what you think hip hop or blackness is. So I've had some discrepancies with some directors with that, but that's part of the reason why I stayed in the theater field, because there's not many POCs, people of color, in directors roles. Or I've been in like a play where I've seen an actor limit themselves, or feel conflicted because they followed a direction of the director that they feel is, I don't want to say racist, but it makes them feel bad because this is not the way they want to go, the way they want to portray themselves. So I stayed in this thing to be the rebel, since acting is not my forte, music is my forte. Be that rebel, say no, I'm not going to do that. You brought me in this role to you know to play, to you brought me in this role because of my music and my talent, but I'm not going to do this, all these colloquialisms that you've learned about the culture, and try to add it into, make me look like a spot in this theater field. So the but I just gave you like the cons of working in theater, the roles, but I do like the collaborative effort, because that's like, with that, a situation like that, that's only happened a couple times, because there's usually like negotiation when you speak with companies, when they have a role for you, is because they usually have that same vision. So, and I choose wisely with the companies that I've you know been on the stage and collaborated with, and somebody's giving me a role. So the studying, whenever somebody chooses me to be in an acting role or something where they incorporate stage, I immediately tell them, or immediately ask them, like, there's going to be, like, rap is going to be incorporated. My specialty is mostly music and not theater, not acting. So and it's fun for me, for the collaboration. If I had to choose, I'd much rather be in much rather do music in a one man show, because again, I could share my story any way I want. Like, I don't think anybody would do Hamlet, the have the direction of Hamlet the way I've done Hamlet, or my second direction, or I've based a couple of sonnets, or a couple of scenes from Shakespeare on social justice. Meanwhile, somebody else will base the scene on just on the story, and not trying to adapt it. I'm adapting and try to bring a message that may make it uncomfortable for the listener, but it's to open up talks. So when you have your own platform, that's you always you always hope for that. But I say that to say, I would never shy from collaboration, because that's the only way we get new stories. That's the only way we can evolve as artists, in the fine arts world, in the theater world too.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. This is so throughout our class, we've also talked to other Black actors and actors about their experiences. And also, we actually had the great opportunity to talk to this Black Shakespearean actor, Keith Hamilton Cobb. And
Oh,
yeah,
I
have you
know.
heard of him?
Yeah,
Yes, and like so in his play, he basically talks about his experience working as a Black Shakespearean actor in the theater world. And yeah, so I think I really learned a lot from him and also from you. So thanks
thank you.
so much for being so generous and being willing to share this information with the public. Yes,
Appreciate it.
yes, and also, so as you've mentioned that like you've had some collaborations with theater companies or theater productions, and in recent years there have been more attempts at incorporating hip hop music into more traditional theaters, or some of the theaters are actually based on hip hop to some extent. And so if you were the director, or if you were, for example, the person in charge of like adapting a Shakespeare play into a modern hip hop version, what play would you choose to adapt into, and what would be some of your directors, I guess like directors arrangements or like artistic ideas? Do you have any ideas?
So if I had a play to choose, this have to be Shakespearean? I mean, that's what I focus on. Uh, I mean, if it wasn't Shakespearean, it would be an original play. Um, it would be an original play about Brooklyn, just the evolution of Brooklyn throughout my life, or and I wouldn't say that for me it would be the evolution of Brooklyn, but if I was directing, it would be depending on what neighborhood or what if I had a group of if I was working with students from a certain region, I would get them to write their own piece. Um, Now I wouldn't say necessarily hip hop would be involved. Well, hip hop would be involved. I would say poetry, hip hop in the writing would be involved. It wouldn't necessarily have to be music, you know, but the writing, sort of the culture and the freedom of hip hop. I would use that in a direction. Um, for Shakespeare, um, it's funny you mentioned Cobb. I feel like stories like Hamlet, stories like um, any story that can connect to Hamlet, anything that can connect to like a social issue, whether it's race or marriage, can or has something connected to or has like a breakdown story of like something that happened in the history in the late 1500s 1600s. I think should and should be incorporated in hip hop. um Actors like Hamilton Cobb. um there's another like who has his one man show for Othello, and there's another actress, Deborah Ann Bird, who she doesn't it's not in music, but she connected not Hamlet, Othello, I'm sorry. She connected her story to Othello. Othello's story reminds me of my time in working in theater, my time working in college. Watching his show, I connected to his story. um the story from Deborah Ann Bird, because she has a one woman show about Othello that's amazing. Then she has an all woman show that she directed, where she's Othello. Those actually inspired me. I've been commissioned to write a one man piece of Othello, about Othello in my own words. Which am, even though I'm influenced by fellow POC actors, writers, and directors, my story of Othello is going to be totally different from their story of Othello. But so those that have characterization. And I would say, and it's based on like the writer and the artist. So if there's like a 60-year-old prince or a 60-year-old somebody that's about to become king, can relate to King John and can relate to that story, I would tell them to write that story, King John. If you can connect to Richard III, I mean, you'll be a treacherous person if you can connect to that character. But if you can connect to that main character, why not write it in the story of that person, as a writer? So that, yeah. So if I was to do one of those plays, that it would be that an adaptation. Um, I feel like if it was like if I can't really think of any um, play right now that's non-Shakespearean that I would put in the adaptation, other than I'm a big fan of August Wilson, who is a poet as well as a playwright. So, I would love to see like a musical version of Fences, or a spoken word version of Fences, or Unison, a Bridge of Troubled Water. Something one of I think I said the wrong play, but I would love to see one of his pieces in a musical form, or one of my favorite poets, like a compilation of like Maya Angelou's poems be put into like an adaptation with her words being, I'm just freestyling now, but like her words being taught to somebody, and like Amanda Gorman. I would love to see like a parallel, a world, a play with Amanda Gorman's poems being, in parallel to Maya Angelou or something like that, with music behind it, because I call poetry hip hop as well.
Yes, I would love to see a play like that. That sounds wonderful. Yes, so actually, you share with me your music video "To Be or Not to Be," and personally, I noticed a lot of really subtle political messages in that video, and I actually wrote a short analysis paper of it. So yes,
Mm,
as you've
thank you.
mentioned, no problem. As you've mentioned, and also in our class, we've analyzed how sometimes Shakespeare's portrayals of Black and minority characters often border on racist stereotypes. And also, in the theater industry, you also have directors who are casting Black actors or actresses, and their casting decisions often reinforce some of the harmful stereotypes. But I think, in contrast, the Black community, especially you as a spoken word artist and also an hip hop artist, has often used these artistic genres as a way to fight back against injustices and institutions of white supremacy. So I guess, how do you think that the reappropriation of Shakespeare through hip hop or through spoken word and through your own words advance Black power and racial equality? Do you, do you think that,
Uh,
yeah?
well, I think it connect because from my knowledge, like his hip hop evolved from hip hop was made to like for a message expressing social different issues, and it goes back to slave days with workers singing griots, excuse me, chanting griots and creating chants about for freedom and the undeserved work that they were putting in. So I think hip hop theater is supposed to be is meant to present a message. It like well for it's meant for entertainment, but there's usually and if there'll be many actors that if they see this they can feel free to to um to shut me down and tell me I'm wrong. But when I see theater, no matter how playful or how musical it is, there's always a message behind the plays. A play. It's like there's always a message behind the writer, and that's what hip hop is for. That's what hip hop was invented for, to convey a message. So I believe they go hand in hand. They both fine arts, and I think it should be used more. I think it has been used more because well, part of the reason why I connect, another reason why I connect Shakespeare with hip hop is that two genres, if I can call Shakespeare genre, yeah, the two genres that when they started, they were, they were there for to present a message. Shakespeare always had hidden messages in his plays, the messages in the sonnets, and they weren't accepted at first. So hip hop wasn't accept, hip hop had to keep going. They tried to ban hip hop. Shakespeare had to create his own lane. He had to move to London from Stratford to create his own message. Um, and I think with theater, um, hip hop would be a way to. It can be the safe way to make uh, things uncomfortable because I think theater is a good way to open up talks. And since um, hip hop, relate hip hop with Black and hip hop with our era, this is a way for us to express ourselves. If you want to, you incorporate a lot of actors and a lot of writers that whose background is in hip hop. That's the same thing as creating a musician, Broadway musician or Broadway a musician who made the musical for Cats or made the musical for Coconuts or one of those wonderful plays whose background is Liberace or background is Beethoven. Um, they have their own vision. You found that now you're a fan of these writers, these directors, these actors who grew up in the world of hip hop, who's we've you know basically owned the genre your musical genre world for the past 25 years. So if you're going for young artists, POCs or POCs, there's usually a element of hip hop in them. So it's just a matter of acceptance. Just like Shakespeare over, education, teaching. And we saying Shakespeare because I'm glad that y'all bringing up this wonderful Black Shakespearean project. But Shakespeare, 400 years, he still hasn't, gone anywhere. No matter he still gets complaints from teachers and from people, but yet we're still moving along. We're still moving along with his legacy. Same thing with hip hop. Um, I say that I think they go hand in hand, and yeah, I hope that answers. I don't want to rant. I'm sorry. Did that answer?
No, that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much.
Hmm.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think these are all the questions for our interview today.